Welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back. Uh, ready? Good. Okay. Um, any questions? Anything in your mind? All right. I want to point out one thing that a couple of you asked me about after class. So in the case book on covenants, we have this diagram. Okay. Our covenants diagram. We discussed with covenants, there are two concepts. The burden running on this side and the benefit running on this side. Okay? How do you know if the burden goes down from B to C? You need two things, right? You need horizontal privity. That is when the land is sold, it's sold with the same transaction as the covenant. And you need vertical privity. That is, if you have a fee simple, you have to give someone else fee simple. You take the entire estate, right? So for the burden to run, you need both horizontal and vertical privity. With respect to the benefit, you don't need those things. You don't need horizontal privity, and the person can take a lesser estate, right? That's easy. The book explains this in a way that I didn't realize was confusing until a couple students flagged it to me, and I actually emailed the author of the book the other day. Why this is confusing is they label this vertical privity and vertical privity, right? The same. That would lead you to think that they're the same thing. But if you actually read the case book, it says, well, vertical privity means one thing here and means something else there. I hate that, okay? If I give you a term, it has the same meaning. So when you look at this diagram, if you want to use this diagram from the book, understand this is vertical privity for the burden to run, and this is how I define vertical privity for the benefit to run. I would just as well cross this out and just pretend that's not there. And I actually emailed the editor, Strahilovitz. He's the guy in the bottom of the book. He teaches at University of Chicago, and he said, yeah, you're kind of right about that. We'll change it for the next edition. So that doesn't help you. But I appreciate that a couple of you came to my office and talked to me, because now future students will have a clear version. So what page is on? 686 or 687? I'm sorry, 80-something. Oh, damn, I flipped the numbers. Oh, so close. Thank you. 836. If you just want to cross out vertical privity here and just understand, you don't need for D to take the full state of A, right? A might have fee simple, D has life estate. The benefit still runs. If you read the text says that, and it says in so many words. But the fact that they drew this diagram like this, which has been in there for, I don't know how many editions, I think is confusing. So I emailed the editors, and they said I don't know what they're going to do, but they said they'll look into it for the next edition. You know, they make a new edition of this book every 2 or 3 years. Let me tell you something. Property law doesn't change. It's been the same for hundreds of years. There's no reason why you have to have new editions of property books. Just make money. There's no other way of looking at it. Common law books, they do change, and that one, the book changes quite a bit every edition. But property, and they always take out good cases, and they put in cases I don't like. It always happens, but property shouldn't change that much. Anyway, so this is a change that needs to be made. So I think I said it correct in class, and I think the book is correct. The only thing that's off is I think is a diagram. So are there any questions on covenants? That I hate to bring it back up. We've been off the topic for a week, but I want to make sure you have it clear in your notes for the rest of the semester.
So, Professor Blackman, so
yeah.
A to D, there is.
Oh, crap. From A to D, I don't think you need. Let me put it this way. From A to D, in my mind, you don't need vertical privity, right? If we define vertical privity as taking the entire estate. If we say vertical privity means A is fee simple, then D needs fee simple, then that requirement's not there. They just use vertical privity to mean this relationship, but they don't use it in the same context on the left side and the right side of the map. And that's what I think is the disconnect. So I'm grateful a few of you flagged that to me, and I talked to the editor yesterday, and he seemed to agree. So South Texas showing Chicago how to do it. So well done. The teaching at most law schools isn't as much of a focus. So you may not know this, but at South Texas, we have a tenure process. I got tenure just last semester. At South Texas, the teaching counts for more than scholarship. At most colleges, most law schools, when you're considered for tenure, the primary factor is your scholarship, is what you are writing, your publications. Here, it's actually less important. The primary important thing is teaching, so we do take this stuff seriously. So I'm always grateful when people point things out that maybe aren't clear or I can do better for next year. And I always make a note, and next year I'll say this point again so the kids don't get confused. All right. Questions on your mind? Yeah, Andrew.
So, question I had, sucks because this kind of came up on term, but as far as B to C, that vertical privity.
That's normal. Yeah.
So that is needed, and just to kind of explain this, because it wasn't very clear in my notes. If C is renting the property from B,
there's no vertical privity. There's no burden. Yeah.
It has to be like a sale.
Whatever B has, C has to have. So if B has fee simple, then C gets fee simple. So if B has a life estate, then C gets a life estate. They assume the entirety of the estate.
Okay. So if they get less than the entirety,
burden does not run. Yeah, that was the exam question. Just surprise, surprise. If it's a rental, there's no vertical privity. The burden doesn't run. Anyway, you'll get there. But that was the exam. Yeah, Kendra.
Is the rental only because there's no selling of land? Like if I only
No, it's a leasehold. A leasehold is a type of estate, but it's of a lesser quantity than a fee simple.
So if I have a lease and give you a lease, then that's fine?
If you had a leasehold for 1 year and you assigned me the entirety of that lease, then the burden would run.
But if I assign it to you for a couple of months?
Then it's not the full leasehold.
Okay.
Right. Remember we discussed leaseholds last semester.
Makes sense.
Remember you had term of years, periodic, right? There are different types of leases. Yeah. It's whatever your term is, my term is. You assign me the entirety of your term. And that's the definition of vertical privity. You have to get the entirety of the bundle of sticks. Whatever person B has, then person C gets. Anyway, yeah, so I did put that in the exam, which is why a few of you asked me about it. But anyway, it wouldn't have mattered because we're talking about the burden on the right column. That's easy. But the one on the left column is one I think that was confusing. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. All right, so let's do a poll question. And it's similar to the one last class, but maybe asked in a little bit different of a fashion. Okay. Property, start polling session. Okay. All right, so here's your question, my friends. When the government exercises its police power over land use, it will never have to provide just compensation. True or false? When the government exercises its police power over land use, it will never have to provide just compensation. True or false? All right. Who am I up to? You're next? What do you think, Andrew?
Well, I put false.
Okay, tell me why you put false.
Because at least I saw the word never.
Okay.
But I was thinking of kind of like eminent domain and stuff like that.
Now, is eminent domain an exercise of the police power?
We haven't got to it yet.
Well, we kind of did. We kind of did, right? Miranda, what do you think?
Well, I agreed with him. Well, I put false. I don't know if I did agree. Because it's over usage of the land.
Mm-hmm.
That
You were considering your answer?
yeah, I'm honestly on the fence. I don't really know.
All right, Madison, what do you think?
I put true,
Okay, tell me why you put true.
because you, in the last class, we talked about police power and the taking is considered unjust and you're not compensated, and so
Yeah.
I said it will never.
Yes.
They don't have to provide compensation.
Madison's correct. So this is that case where actually never, it turns out to be true. And let me explain to you why. Let's see you guys in this one. Okay. Oh, wow, I tripped up a lot of you, right? We have the takings clause, right? It says, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. If the government takes your property, they got to pay you for it. So, right, we have to ask, which bucket are we in, right? Are we in a taking or are we in a police power? There are different categories. If the government exercises its police power, they don't have to pay you. If it's not an exercise of its police power, that means it's a taking, they have to pay. So we used an example last class, a nuisance, right? If your house is rotted with wood, and it's going to collapse, they might condemn your property and they might just, demolish it, saying it's a nuisance. That's an exercise of the police power. And they're not going to pay you for it. If you have a nuisance, right, they'll stop you from polluting, whatever happens to be. Now, if they want to take your property and turn it into a hotel or a stadium or a subway or something else, that's not an exercise of the police power. That's actually a taking of your property. Where the line is between the police power and the taking, we'll spend the next 2 or 3 weeks on. But what you have to remember is, if it's something that's within the government's police power, then they're not going to pay. If it amounts to a taking, then that triggers the Fifth Amendment, and they have to pay. And the first case today, the Pennsylvania case, I think illustrates this, right? Pennsylvania tried to regulate how land is used. And they said, well, we're just telling people what they can build in certain properties. Was that an exercise of the police power, which they could do without any payments? Or did it cross the line and constitute taking of private property, in which case just compensation must be provided? So any questions on that? The answer is actually true here. But the key point is, what is police power? Right? Andrew mentioned, eminent domain. That is not police power. That's a taking, and it falls in the other bucket. Okay? Everyone, any questions on that? All right, so the first case, the Pennsylvania Northwestern Distributors, Inc. versus Zoning Hearing Board. What a name for a case, right? It has to do with a term that is a little bit of a mouthful. Okay? Lawful, pre-existing, non-conforming use. I always jumble that one, right? So here's the idea. We all have our homes. We use property in a certain way. The government decides we want to change the zoning code. So maybe there's one area that was all residential, and they say we want to make it industrial. Or maybe there's some area that was all industrial, say we want to make it residential. What happens to people who are already there? Who have their homes there, have their businesses there? Do they have to get up and move? So as a general matter, we grandfather properties. That is, if you were in the vicinity before the zoning code was changed, you get to stay there. You have what's called a lawful, pre-existing, non-conforming use. Or if you want to just say it simpler, it's grandfathered, right? You were there before the law was changed, and you get to keep it there, but not forever. So for example, let's say you have a one-story house, a one-family house in an area that's zoned, rezoned as industrial. You can keep your house for as long as you want. What if you applied to the city for building permit to add a second story to your house? They'll say, no. You can keep it as you have it, but if you want to change it, you are no longer a pre-existing non-conforming use. Right? You're not pre-existing. You've now modified your structure, and now you're not subject to the zoning code. You're not grandfathered anymore. So it often happens when you have these lawful non-conforming uses that it becomes impossible to change them. And you actually have people keep everything exactly the same. I remember when I was clerking at this one case where there was this landfill, I think in Cincinnati, and it was built there like in the early 1920s, right before there was even a zoning code. And it still was there. And they never changed it. So a landfill didn't actually change their structure. And the city was trying to get rid of it, said, oh, you installed this and you installed this. And they kept winning in court saying, no, it's the same property. So you always ask the question, right? Is there any sort of lawful non-conforming use? The Pennsylvania case is a little bit different. They didn't have a grandfather clause. Instead, they had what's called amortization. Okay? Brittany, you want to tell us, can you give the facts, please, in the Pennsylvania case?
Sorry.
Oh, damn, I called it right when you were chewing. I'm sorry.
It's fine.
Okay.
I was a landowner and he invested in property to open up an adult shop. And
But by the way, before there was internet, you had to go to a store to buy stuff. Just in case people don't realize that they were selling pornography. That used to be a very controversial thing to have in a neighborhood. All right, go on.
He opened it and within a week, 4 days or so, the supervisory board of the township moved to set an ordinance to start to regulate that type of business.
Okay.
Where it could be opened up and where it could be run. They brought a notice saying that he was out of compliance.
Well, just what exactly was the ordinance that the town adopted? Just describe it for me briefly.
They said that it's an adult commercial enterprise under the ordinance, and it does not. No, that's not it.
Where were they allowed to build adult bookstores under this ordinance? Got it, Megan?
Let me have Barbara look.
Beyond 1,000 feet of residential area.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. This is a very common technique, right? They don't come out and say we're banning adult bookstores. The reason why is actually constitutional. There are a number of Supreme Court cases that says that you can't ban adult businesses, strip clubs, bookstores, etc. First Amendment violation. So they can't come out and just say we're banning strip clubs. But what the Supreme Court had said is, well, you can regulate their location. Because usually when you have a strip club or an adult bookstore, it attracts unsavory characters, we'll just put it that way. It's what the court calls secondary effects, right? It's called the secondary effects doctrine. I don't think it's good law anymore. If you take me for First Amendment next semester, I'll talk about this, but I don't think this is even good law anymore. But the court said, because certain types of businesses have secondary effects, you can regulate them. In other words, put them outside of residential areas, protect the children from these, perverts, right? Whatever, right? Whatever. So they enacted a law that says no adult store within 500 feet of a school, hospital, nursing home, group care facility, park, church, establishment selling alcohol, or another adult commercial enterprise, or within 1,000 feet of residential zones. Now, if any of you look at a map of any city, and I want you to draw a 500-foot radius around every single school, hospital, nursing home, group care facility, park, church, bar, or residential area, there's no place left, right? I want you to understand this. 500 feet is a pretty big distance, so it's basically 500 each direction, basically 1,000 feet across, right? There's nowhere left on the map to build a facility like this. The attempt of these laws is a shadow ban, right? Basically, to zone out of existence certain undesirable uses. That's what this law is designed to do. And indeed, the history of this is very clear, right? They open up on what, May 4th, and the next 4 days later, they say, aha, we're going to amend the zoning code. And about 2 weeks later, after that, they amend the ordinance. Let me tell you something. Government doesn't move this quickly ever, right? From 2 weeks that this entire ordinance, this was a fix, right? It was designed to punish this one building. Now, when I was clerking, I had this one case that I always remember at this point in the semester. It was in Pennsylvania too, not too far from here actually. A group wanted to open up a methadone clinic. You know what a methadone clinic is? It's a treatment for people with opiate addictions, more or less, right? A group found a location in Pennsylvania where they wanted to open up one of these clinics. And the city came in, they enacted an ordinance similar to this. You can't build a methadone clinic within 1,000 feet of like a school or a park or whatever else. Okay, fine. So they found an area in like this industrial zone nowhere near the center of town, all the way out in the boondocks, right? And this is like really western Pennsylvania, right? Nowhere, middle of nowhere. And they'd say, okay, we're opening up our clinic here. You know what the city did? This was a crazy case. There was a little strip of grass on the sidewalk in front of the clinic. Anyone want to guess what they did? They declared it a park. There was a little strip of grass right on the sidewalk in front of the clinic, and they designated that a park. Therefore, they couldn't establish the clinic. And it went through the courts. I think ultimately the clinic prevailed after several years of litigation, and they opened up. But this is a very common usage, right? Cities can't ban stuff, so they basically try to zone it out of existence. One other related concept. I'm sure you're all familiar with the concept of sex offender registries, right? And that if you commit certain types of sexual offenses, you're put on a list. And one of the conditions of being on that list is you can't live within 500 feet of a school, church, park, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This makes it impossible to live because there's nowhere for you to go, right? In any big city, you are always within 500 feet of one of these types of establishments, just as a matter of geography. So you have places like Miami, Florida, this is a very common thing, where you have sex offenders living under bridges and highway overpasses because it's like not near anything. It's basically in the middle of a highway. And, you know, whether these laws are used too much, they probably are, you're basically zoning people out of existence. You know, Anatole France said that both the rich and the poor are prohibited from living under the bridges. Literally, they're living underneath bridges. So whenever you see this sort of zoning, this 500 feet deal, just understand it's a ban. It's not really shifting. It's trying to ban it altogether. Okay. So the reason why this case is different, though, is they'd already opened up their construction, right? It wasn't like they were applying for a permit to build somewhere. They had already opened it up. So this ordinance is something specific. They said you need to come into compliance within 90 days, right? That your business needs to come into compliance within 3 months. Tacey, why was this problematic for this business to come into compliance within 3 months? Could they possibly do it? No, why not?
Well, because they would either have to, I mean, they'd have to start selling something new.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, become a Christian bookstore, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there was no way for this business to come into compliance. And let's just put this point bluntly, right? They had merchandise, right? They had stuff. Would the government pay them for getting rid of all their stuff within 3 months?
No.
They maybe signed a lease, right? Maybe they'd taken out a mortgage to acquire the property. They hired workers, right? There are a lot of things in a business that go into opening up a location. And they said, sorry, shut down in 3 months. Okay, so the adult bookstore, they challenged it in the state proceedings. They appealed it to the zoning hearing board. The zoning hearing board upheld the provision. They said this benefits the town. And therefore, it went to the High Court, the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania. Okay, so the question is what happens to this amortization principle, right? Amortization, oh wait, Christiana, what does amortization mean?
From what I understood in the case, it was a sort of like a clause in allowing some sort of ordinance to, I guess, happen on a certain subject.
Good, yeah. So instead of grandfathering in the old non-conforming uses, it's a wind down period, right? You have 90 days to wind down your business and come into conformance. And again, it's a joke. They can't come into conformance. It's going to shut down their store, right? It's not possible. But they have a 90-day wind down period. And that happens here. What does the court do here?
Well, they talk about police powers and they
Good.
talk about the fact that it's not police powers here.
Good.
Because they decide that it's unconstitutional and that it's just taking and that they should be compensated.
Very good. Very good. And I think the way she described it illustrates the poll question here, right? The city said that their amortization clause is an exercise of the police power, right? That we're making sure that we have a consistent zoning code and we don't have these prior non-conforming uses which frustrate the purpose of our zoning code. The bookstore said, no, 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 this is a taking, right? By making me shut down in 30 days, or sorry, 90 days, they're taking my property, which requires compensation. Now, Elena, could the government use its takings power to pay him to shut down his business?
Well, I guess they could, but they would have to pay, and I'm not sure that the taxpayers would like to pay.
Exactly. They can shut down the business if they want to pay, right? They can just seize the property, eminent domain, and pay him the fair market value of his business. But they don't want to, right? Government always wants police power because it's free, right? In every case you do for the rest of the semester, the government will say, this is police power, it's free. In contrast, the property owner is like, no, 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 taking, give me money, give me money, give me money. Right? And so again, which bucket are we in? Are we in the taking bucket? Are we in the police power bucket? The majority of the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania says that this is a taking, right? They say that property is of a very high value in the state. And therefore, we have to hold property with a lot of protection. So therefore, this is a taking. If the government wants to do it in 90 days, they have to pay. Now, Hannah, tell me about the concurring opinion.
They say that as long as the provision is reasonable, then it'll pass through.
What do you mean reasonable?
So they use, like, for their good factor, so they can just do it in 90 days to pass it.
Okay, very good. So the concurring opinion complains, right? The majority adopts what's called a per se rule. Okay? Now, you've seen this phrase per se before, probably in torts. Elise, remember the phrase per se? At least in torts, you probably saw this? Yeah, where do you remember it? Sounds familiar, I know. People use this word wrong all the time. Just in regular, it's like per se. No, they're using it wrong, right? But anyway, but in torts, you probably learned it, I think, correctly.
Negligence.
Good, yeah. What's negligence per se?
Just basically means it's negligence. There's no.
Yeah, almost like a strict liability type deal, right? Or maybe libel per se. That sounds familiar.
Kind of like on its face.
Exactly, yeah. People use per se meaning like by itself, right? Which is not what it means, right? It means basically automatic, right? On its face. Anthony said that. It's a good phrase also, right? The mere fact that you have an amortization clause is a per se taking, right? The majority says the mere fact that you have this amortization principle, it's a per se taking. Think of it like a strict liability offense, a strict negligence effect, right? Having it is illegal. You can't have it. That's the majority, right? The concurring opinion says, well, we don't like this per se rule, right? They say an amortization can be constitutional, that is, it can be an exercise of the police power, if it's reasonable. So think about it like this. The concurrence says, if the amortization is reasonable, it's police power. If it's unreasonable, it's a taking, right? So which bucket are you in depends on reasonableness. And they define reasonableness as the length of the period, how much time they have to change, et cetera, et cetera. So maybe if they have, instead of 90 days, let's say they have 9 years to change, 10 years to change, right? Can a business wind down in a decade? Is that really unreasonable? Or is any amortization unconstitutional? So the difference between the majority and the dissent is majority is a bright line rule. Any amortization principle is a per se taking, and the concurring opinion says only if it's unreasonable is it a taking. But there's not much guidance of what a bright line rule is. And just, you might say, this is crazy. Why do we ever want to have a balancing test? If a city has a power to design a neighborhood in a certain way, are they really going to be stuck with this little bookstore there for 30 years and everything around, these nice homes and stuff? Right? Can't they get rid of an old usage? Or not? Okay.
I like the,
Anthony, sorry, yeah? Good.
no, I was just saying, I like also the discussion, they also pointed that the 3 months wouldn't allow the appellant to actually find another means of getting himself income.
No. And especially usually you sign a 1-year lease, a 2-year lease, a 5-year lease, whatever it happens to be. And Anthony, let me ask you next, right? What would a reasonable period of time be to shut down your business? Let's say you're a small business owner, right? And you put all of your hard work into opening up this adult bookstore, right? What would a reasonable period be? Sorry, go do something else.
You're asking me personally, or what?
I don't know, I'm asking.
I'd say a good couple of years, not a good couple.
So you want to have a business for 4 years, and you have to shut down the 4th year? That's a tough thing, right? So, how you get creditors, right? If you say, yeah, I have a good business, but we're shutting down in 4 years. Will anyone give you a loan? Will someone write you a 30-year mortgage? Right? Will people give you a line of credit? Will they give you inventory in the 4th year? I mean, the downside to the concurrence is you can't run a business with an end date in mind, right? No one's going to give you credit for that. You need to know that it's going to be a going concern, a going business. But the flip side is if a city has the power to design its communities how they appear, then too bad, you should have decided to build your business elsewhere, move it to another neighborhood. Right? I mean, I guess he could have moved his business to another part of town, but, you know, maybe he wanted. I mean, the methadone case I had was actually very tricky because when you have a clinic that's not near where people live and they have to travel to get there, it's very difficult for them to get to work and keeping with kids and stuff, right? You want a clinic being where people actually are. So even remotely putting it elsewhere has, I think, certain problems. Although I guess with the adult bookstore, people are going to go there not with their kids. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I
So
think.
when do you think, based on what you were saying, the court didn't touch on that, but instead touched on, okay, how it affect the owner as opposed to how it affect the people? Just your thoughts.
I think the court stressed property is very important, right? And I think the court said that property is more important than the ability of the city to eliminate these non-conforming uses. I think that was the basis of the court's opinion. What do you think?
Oh, what? I
You
think
tell me.
as you're saying, they're leaning on
Yeah,
property
yeah.
and just those matters, and not too much on the people, though.
Mhm.
Given that this case was done in 1991, I think it was, looking at the context where we're at here in 2018, I think it's good to kind of consider it at a different angle, look at how it affects.
Yeah, I think this case though was brought under the Pennsylvania Constitution, not the U.S. Constitution, which actually makes a difference, right? You know, I'm guilty of this myself, but in common law, all we ever talk about is the federal constitution. There are 50 state constitutions. And often a state constitution might be interpreted to provide more protections than does the federal constitution. And by the way, just keep in mind, as the Supreme Court gets more conservative, watch state courts start doing their own thing, going the other direction. Yeah, Brittany.
Last class we talked about in the case of it was like U1, U2, and how.
Yeah, Euclid, yeah.
The 7th zone that wasn't really
Prohibited,
marked
yeah.
as the 7th zone. It was U7, but it was, you said, for prohibited. Do a lot of municipalities operate in that way, just like the Euclid, where it would possibly, where an adult shop like this would fall into a prohibited one, and would that be constitutional?
I think prohibited means you can't build anything there. That might be like a wetland or something, right? Where you can't build anything at all.
So not necessarily a restriction on the type of.
Oh, yeah. Prohibited meant you can't build anything.
Okay.
Like just no construction. Maybe the ground isn't strong enough. It's a wetland or a swamp or something.
Gotcha.
Right, but generally these sorts of adult bookstores are stuck in the industrial zone, right next to the warehouses and the factories, far from where people live. The idea is.
Is it constitutional for an ordinance to say that this particular thing can never be built, like anywhere?
Well, what depends on the thing is, adult bookstores and strip clubs have a certain First Amendment cachet, and the courts have held that you have a right to. Some courts held you have a right to pole dance and sell adult books and the like. So, I don't think you could shut down an adult bookstore. You know, if it's a, oh boy, did anyone see the news recently about the sex doll shop? I wasn't going to mention it, but now I'm going to. Everyone know what this is, right? These are, oh God, I'm getting in trouble. They're basically lifelike dolls that people can use for activities. And oh, Yves, stop. And someone wanted to build them a shop like this in Houston, and basically the city council would just bang this all together, right? It's a good exam question. I mean, do you have a constitutional right for those sorts of intimate relations? But the question is, does it fit within a 14th Amendment protection, right? If it's like, manufacturing chemical waste and they want to ban that in the city, that's probably okay. But these sort of intimate relations, they might have 14th Amendment things. I don't know. I was thinking about that when I saw the story in Houston a couple weeks ago. I was like, wow, how quick could they ban this? And like the next day they banned it. Government moves quickly when these things come to town. They move real quick. Yeah, Andrew?
I was actually looking it up just right before because this reminded me of it.
Oh, God.
They akin the renting the dolls there as more prostitution, but you could still buy the dolls as more of a sex toy, which is, there's no prohibiting.
Not that you asked, but there's actually case law on whether the 14th Amendment protects the right to access sex toys. And there's a town, I think it was in Georgia, that tried banning the sale of sex toys, and the court found this unconstitutional. So I don't know about the renting of it, though. That's a new one for me.
Into prostitution.
Oh,
That's what
boy.
they argue.
Thank you, yeah. I'm
Thanks.
sorry, I didn't mean to.
No, this is why I'm here. Yeah, Madison.
Well, and related to this case, but it's more related to the class. So
Good.
them saying that you can't, like rent it before you can buy the doll. Would that be more considered a taking, or would that be their authorization of police power? That ban.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I think
I don't see how you could compensate.
Oh boy, you're getting me in trouble. I think to the extent that the police power includes the power to regulate public morality, which is an open question, but if you can use the police power to regulate public morality, then I suppose they can also prohibit various sex acts that they deem immoral. But the problem is, after Lawrence v. Texas and other similar cases, that power of banning stuff because of moral disapproval is somewhat weakened. So I don't know that it would be constitutional to ban a person from engaging in intimate acts with basically a toy of some sort. It's not real. It's not a human being. There's no consent issues of any sort I can think of. So I think this statute would be vulnerable to challenge. Not that I've given it much thought, but at first blush, and I'm blushing now. All right, any other? It's like that. You get me in trouble all the time. Every year when I do this case, something like this comes up every year. All right, other questions in the first case, on the Pennsylvania case? Thank you for the questions, Madison and Brittany. Always food for thought. Okay. Yeah, whenever I first moved to Houston, I think I stayed in the gallery my first night at the Sheraton right by the mall, and I saw the zone erotic. I'm like, what the hell is this doing here? I'm like, oh yeah, Houston's no zoning code. So you can build basically an adult store, which I think is closing. Remember that right? I think, just someone Google it. I think it's the one over up at the Galleria by Westheimer 610. Oh, don't Google it. Oh, God. Oh, God. Don't Google it. Never mind. Never mind. But anyway, Houston lacked the zoning code, which means that's why it's there. Next case. Next. I have way too much fun. Next case, okay? So any questions on the Pennsylvania one? Please no more. Ask me after class. Okay, good. So the next topic discusses what the book calls flexibility in zoning. If you've noticed, these zoning codes are very rigid and very unforgiving. But there are two concepts that give flexibility to zoning. There's the variance, and there's what's called the special exception. Okay? The variance and the special exception. Do not confuse these. People will confuse these on the exam without fail, but please try not to confuse these. Okay? A variance, right? A variance is I don't want to say exception. With a variance, the government can make an exception to normal rule based on hardship, on a case-by-case basis. Okay? What does that mean? You go to the government, to the zoning board, and you say, the zoning code is unfair to me, right? I'll give you a heartbreaking example, right? Let's say the law says you need to have, 10 feet in your front yard between the sidewalk and your front house, right? Say 10 feet. And let's say a person is in a wheelchair, and they need to build a wheelchair ramp. And that ramp comes within 5 feet of the sidewalk. But that's the only way this person can enter his house, right? He used to go up steps, was fine, but then go to a wheelchair. He goes to the zoning board and says, look, I know the zoning code says I need 10 feet, but I need my wheelchair. I can't move my house back. And the zoning board says, you know what? Okay, we're going to give you a variance because you've demonstrated that there's a unique hardship, and because of this case and this case alone, we're going to let you build your ramp. And we're not going to hold you out of compliance. We'll give you in writing a variance. Now, the next door neighbor says, hey, I want to put a swimming pool in my front yard, and it's going to be right near the curb. They say, go away. That's not hardship, right? The idea of a variance is it doesn't set any sort of precedent. It's a case-by-case hardship where unique circumstances that were not anticipated arise, right? When they wrote the zoning code, they didn't think they'd be blocking people with wheelchairs from getting to their houses, right? That wasn't their thought. They just want a nice big front yard, okay? So a variance, again, deals with any sort of hardship. And it's often called an undue hardship. You'll see this phrase in some of the cases, which means it's not just life is difficult. It's life is going to be really difficult, which is why I give you the wheelchair example, because you can't get into your house otherwise, right? And also, it's not like you made a mistake, that like you inadvertently built a swimming pool and said, hey, it's going to be really expensive to have to remove the swimming pool. No, that was your fault. You built a damn swimming pool. Versus this person said, I need to have my ramp assembled for the wheelchair. Okay? So there's a lot of discretion about variances. And it's, it does a tug on your heartstrings, right? It's really sad. But there's discretion in the zoning boards. The second type is what's called a special exception, also called a special use permit. It's also called a conditional use permit. It's got a lot of names. Okay? Special use permit, conditional use permit. This is where the government makes an exception to a zoning code based on specific factors, right? Let's say, for example, that the government understands that lots of people in the communities need wheelchair ramps, right? It's come up that there are a lot of disabled people in the community, they need wheelchair ramps. Instead of making every one of them go and plead variance, that there's an undue hardship, the legislature says that we will make a special exception to wheelchair ramps if they are no more than 3 feet wide and 5 feet long. And if you meet those conditions, you get a special use. You get a conditional use permit. You give you a special exception. In other words, the legislature predefines what gets you your permit. If it's a 3 feet wide by 5 feet wide ramp, you get it. There's no reason to demonstrate hardship, right? We understand it's a hard problem, but say if you want to build a 10-foot ramp, then you have to get permission on a variance, right? The entire idea of a special use permit is that the legislature decides in advance the conditions you need to satisfy to get the permit, right? That's why I actually like conditional use permit, because there were conditions in there, right? If you meet the conditions established by the legislature, you get your permit to build what you want to build, right? There's not a discretionary act. At that point, all the zoning board has to do is check the box. Is it 3 feet? Check. Is it 5 feet? Check. Okay, you get your permit. Right? Actually, 3, 4, 5 triangle. See what I just did there? See? I try. I got the right angle. So, yeah, Lauren.
So would you say that as far as like, I guess so like with variance, that would be more beneficial to whether it's like if it's like a single person that's looking for that variance?
Yes.
As far as a special exception would probably be for like a class of people.
Yes, exactly. And that's a good point that Lauren just made, right? I co-signed her statement. Oh, God. I'm going on a tangent. With a variance, it's meant for one person at a time on a case-by-case basis, right? With the special use permits or the special exceptions, it's designed for a class of people who have a consistent problem, a repeatable problem that pops up over and over again, and the legislature addresses in advance. Now, if you notice I keep saying legislature, right? Why am I saying legislature, not the zoning board? Zoning boards are not elected officials, usually. Sometimes they are, but usually not. In our government, the branch that makes laws are people who are elected. The zoning boards are usually appointed, right, by whatever means they have. They're usually not even people who are familiar with the law. Maybe they're architects, whatever. The zoning board can make discretionary judgments for variances, right? They're allowed to decide what a hardship is. Maybe that's fair, maybe it's not, but I'll leave that just to you. With a variance, they can make judgments on what is hardship or not. However, the zoning board can't exercise discretion on the conditional use permits or the special exceptions. It's the legislature that assigns these conditions, right? They say 3 feet by 5 feet, check, go, right? They can't make discretionary judgments on the conditional use permits because that looks like legislation, and zoning boards can engage in legislative acts. And this is important for, I think, the cases we have today. Okay? Especially the third case, but also the second case. All right, so any other questions on that general frame? I think, James, you next? Okay. Can you give me the facts, please, in the New Jersey case, Commons versus Westwood Zoning Board of Adjustments?
Yeah, so the landowner, they were looking for variance because they have a smaller piece of land.
Okay.
And what the ordinance allows to build a single-family home.
Okay.
Ordinance requires, I think, 75 feet of frontage, and they only have 30 feet.
Yeah.
And then a developer came and wanted to buy their land on the condition that they can build a single-family home.
Okay. So what happens?
So they applied for a variance.
Okay. And again, what do you need to show to get a variance in this jurisdiction?
Undue hardship,
Okay. Very good. Right. And what was the undue hardship?
that they can't sell the land, so the value.
Right. Okay. So they claim that their inability to sell the land was undue hardship. All right, Andres, what happens?
Well, first the neighbors, they want to object, saying that they're gonna drive down the property owner value, and it's gonna be not fitting with everything else.
Yeah.
And so then they go to the, I don't know if it was first to the court or first to the board.
Goes first to the board. Yeah, the Board of Appeals, it always goes first, yeah. Oh, it first goes to the zoning board and then the zoning board of appeals, and then you can appeal to a real judge. Right, they're not really courts. They're whatever.
But then eventually they found that because of the undue hardship, because the lot did not conform to the sizes, they were granted the variance, and that they said essentially that the pricing would not be ruined for the rest of the neighbors.
Yeah. So in this case, they got their variance, Andres?
Yes.
This is rare, right? Generally, when the zoning board denies a variance, it's almost always the case that that's affirmed. But again, we're in New Jersey, right? We're in New Jersey where they do crazy stuff, at least with property law. So generally, and this is, I think, I can say majority rule easily, when the board who's closest to the neighborhood finds that there's no hardship, that's the end of the road, right? That's going to be the final judgment. But here, the court finds that there was that there was a hardship to grant that justified granting the variance. They say that the planned house didn't violate any traditional purpose of zoning. There was really no basis for denying it. It would let the land base become useless, couldn't really use it for anything else. And the board never explained their decision. But again, this is somewhat of an outlier, because usually when the board finds that there's no hardship, that's the end of the road. Okay? So any questions on the New Jersey case? Anything on the New Jersey case? Yeah, again, it's strange. Usually the zoning boards are not reversed. It's very odd. All right, Brandy, you want to give me the facts, please? The next one, the one from Maine, Cope versus inhabitants of the town of Brunswick, please. Okay, Mary.
Yeah, so essentially he just wanted to build an apartment complex in a suburban residential area.
Mm-hmm.
That was prohibited.
Okay, so the zoning code generally prohibited building apartments in residential, right? But there might be a little wiggle room, right?
Well, yeah, because that's where we're talking about the special exceptions, and they go into the 4 conditions that you have to have.
Okay, good. So what are those conditions, Mary?
It is the other requirements of the ordinance are met. The use will not adversely affect the health, safety, or general welfare of the public. The use will not tend to defeat the purpose of this ordinance or of the comprehensive plan for the development of the town. And the use will not tend to devaluate or alter the essential characteristic of the surrounding property.
Okay, very good. So here, the legislature made these 4 categories, right? Now, I gave you an example before. If you want to build a wheelchair ramp 3 feet by 4 feet, no, 3 feet by 5 feet, the 4 is the other leg, right? That's fine. It's easy. You can check a box. But Rochelle, why were these conditions, especially as number 2 and 4, problematic for the court?
Because I guess it gave the zoning board too much discretion to decide.
Very good. What's the problem with giving the zoning board too much discretion?
They're not the legislature.
Yes, exactly. Perfect answer. by giving this much discretion to the zoning board, you're allowing them to act as if they were legislatures, right? They get to define, what the health, safety, and welfare of the neighborhood is. That's an inherent exercise of the police power. That's an inherently legislative act. They get to decide what the character of the neighborhood is. That's an inherently legislative act. And the court finds that this is an ultra vires. You've seen this word, I'm sure. An ultra vires delegation of power. You probably did this in common law. If you didn't, I'll go yell at Professor Alfini. But when you have a legislative body that tries to delegate its power, they have to do so within certain boundaries. And if it goes beyond those boundaries, it's what's called ultra vires. Ultra vires means out of bounds or out of boundaries. And this was too much of a delegation of power. It was ultra vires. Therefore, conditions 2 and 4 were too vague. There was not enough guidance. And the permit cannot be denied on that basis. Okay? Now, what's strange about this entire holding is when you have a variance, you have boards making a lot of discretionary judgments, right? They decide what a hardship is. And again, that's about tugging at your heartstrings. So with a variance, boards get a hell of a lot of discretion. But with a special use permit, they don't get these sorts of discretion, right? Why is this the case? I'm not exactly sure. I'm sure there's a good reason. But I think the best reason is variances are meant to be a one-by-one case, whereas the special use permits are designed to be for entire classes. So perhaps the courts are okay with you making this sort of discretionary judgment here and there, as long as it's not like a common thing. Whereas if it's consistently applied, you need to have rigid rules, right? That local zoning boards can expand on decisions made by the legislatures. Okay? Therefore, the court found that the statute here was facially unconstitutional, and they got their permit. Right? If the government wants to have a conditional use permit, they need to give more intelligible guidelines of what can be used. So any questions on the main case? All right, so just again to summarize, variances and special exceptions. A variance is an authorized departure from the ordinance. And it's granted for unique cases where there's some sort of hardship. And specifically, these are not the kind of things you can anticipate in advance. It's something that just pops up that wasn't expected. The special exception or the special use permit is use permitted by the ordinance, right? So long as certain conditions are attached to it. You have to meet certain conditions. And these are types of problems that are anticipated in advance. But you can't use special exceptions in a purely discretionary fashion. You need to have spelled out requirements. Otherwise, you have a delegation of legislative authority, and that's unconstitutional. Andres?
Does the variance run with the land once it's in place, or once like the person with a wheelchair moves out? And, like,
Oh, it runs with the land, right? So let's say that you're, well, oh, I thought you were asking something else. As a general matter, if you're grandfathered, right? If you've a grandfathered prior non-conforming lawful use, it runs with the land. So if I have, the adult bookstore and it's grandfathered and I sell it to someone else, he gets the grandfather clause. Now your question is, does the variance stay if, let's say, the woman in the wheelchair leaves? It's a good question. I don't think they could probably take it away. If there's no longer a hardship, they may actually dissolve it. Yeah, I think they probably could. Yeah, I think they would actually. I think the variance is a temporary exception, and if the person in the wheelchair leaves, I think they would they'd repeal it. Yeah.
What if they sell to somebody in a wheelchair?
Well, that's great because it's already built, right?
Right.
So would they need to apply for it again? So yeah, so as a practical matter, right? None of this matters unless a neighbor complains, right? No one cares about zoning codes unless a neighbor complains. And if a neighbor goes to the zoning board and raises a complaint, then they say, we want to revoke your ordinance because it's not needed anymore. Or they say, you're not in conformance, demolish your ramp.
Yeah, didn't they say in something that if it's not used for like 2 years substantially or whatever.
Yeah, you could have a wind down period for a variance. You reassess every couple of years. One thing that's unique about Houston, because we have no zoning, is you have a lot of deed restrictions, which are sort of similar to this. And if you have a person violating a deed restriction, the city attorney can come in and file a lawsuit. So you actually have litigation not from a neighbor, but from the city, which is sort of unique for Houston. All right, so any other questions on special exceptions versus variances? Yeah, Brittany?
And it attaches to the person, it's not attached to the property.
Well, with the wheelchair example, I guess it would attach to the person. But let's say you get a variance because you need, say, 50 feet of frontage and it's only 48, and they give you a variance, then it's attached to the land. So I wouldn't make too much of a fuss of who it's attached to. I think it would depend on the nature of the variance, because it could be either the person or the land itself. They go either way. All right, so any other questions on variances, exceptions? Please don't confuse these for exam. Like, I may not label it. I'll just describe it, say, here's the ordinance, and here's what it spells out. And you'll need to figure out, is this going to be a hardship exception variance, or is this a special conditional use permit? You'll have to know what I'm talking about, so I may trick you on this. Please don't confuse them. All right, anything else on this? All right, who am I to? Josh, back up top. All right, can you give me the facts, please, in the last case, the Rochester, Minnesota case?
This is a single tract of land in Rochester, Minnesota, bordered by single-family homes, multiple-family dwellings, and a vacant lot zoned for institutional use. The lot itself was zoned for multiple-family dwellings, but the owner wanted to build some luxury condominiums.
What were they for?
For high-density residential use.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, I'll pause you. The Mayo Clinic, which is this humongous medical facility. When all the really famous people get sick, they go to the Mayo Clinic. And so this was in Rochester, Minnesota, and they wanted to have all these nice condos for doctors and patients and the like. All right, go on, Josh.
The council members thought this would be a great idea since, in the area there were similar types of central business districts, density residential uses and the like. So they went ahead and rezoned the area, and as you said, the neighbors did not like that residential.
Yeah. Well, did they rezone the entire community or just one area?
Just his one lot.
Okay, so here's a problem, right? The entire idea of a zoning code is the idea that you have a comprehensive plan. And we'll come back to this idea of a comprehensive plan. It means we have a city and we have an idea of how everything has to look. This will be U1 residential, that's U3 apartments, and that's U5, industrial, whatever it happens to be, right? But we have a plan, right? We're not just making crap up. And the reason why courts have upheld zoning codes is because they say this plan and all the pieces that fit together like a puzzle. And if you have this one exception there and this other exception there, the entire thing will fall apart. Now, is that accurate? Of course not, right? They're humans, they're government officials, they're making judgments. Whether a plan is actually comprehensive, we can argue. But you're supposed to have some sort of consistent vision for a neighborhood, right? Then Matt, what's problematic about the way the city here went around zoning? Why is it problematic? What's problematic about the zoning decision made here by the government?
By the decision to not allow the condominium to be built in that area?
No, the decision to allow it to be built. The zoning decision, the change.
That the owners of the neighboring homes didn't like it.
No, I know they didn't like it. But why is it problematic in the fashion which they made the zoning change?
It's like spot zoning. It's
Okay.
specific.
What's spot zoning? Tell me that.
It's whenever you have a zone change on a small plot of land. That's inconsistent with the uses of land surrounding there.
And why is spot zoning problematic, Matt? But as a general matter, why, Austin? Why is spot zoning as a general matter problematic?
Creates the inconsistencies, unreliability, and what the land's going to be used for. It makes property
Very good, yeah. When you only zone one area, it suggests that the government's not acting in the general welfare, right? If you're only focusing on one area, the government's bestowing benefits on one group and burdens on everyone else, right? And the court says that this act is not supported by a rational basis, right? It's not related to health, safety, and welfare of others. Now, I'm sure you learned with Professor Alfini the term rational basis, which generally means the government wins, right? When you review a law under rational basis scrutiny, the government wins because virtually everything's rational. Indeed, rational means conceivable. Is there some conceivable basis on which the government acted here in a good fashion? It's upheld. But here, in a surprising decision, the court applies fairly strict scrutiny here, saying that the fact they only targeted one group and one group alone for this change means it's not in the general interest, it's not supported by a rational basis. Therefore, this is an unconstitutional zoning change, and they halted it, right? It's not in accordance with a comprehensive plan, and therefore, it was unconstitutional. Okay. This is, again, an outlier. This is not normal. Usually zoning decisions are always upheld. But here they said the spot zoning was somewhat problematic. They were very skeptical of spot zoning. So if they had just, zoned 3 or 4 neighborhoods and not just one, they probably would have been okay. But they got greedy, and they just did this one, and I think that they got burned by that. They could have done it probably safely otherwise. And again, always, yes, when neighbors complain, that's when stuff gets to court. Neighbors always complain. People like complaining. Okay. All right, so any questions on that case? All right. Let me summarize a bit, and you guys can go home. With zoning, we have certain types of carve-outs, so it's not so rigid. You have your special exceptions, in which you have certain conditions set by the legislature. If you meet those conditions, you get your permit. And then you have variances. If you show a hardship, you tug on the heartstrings, you get what you want. Courts are generally very deferential to zoning decisions, but in some rare cases, like with a spot zoning or where they're not heartstringing, tuggy enough, the court might override lower court decisions. Anything else? I'll see you all on Monday. Thank you.